Hello mini makers, today we'll be making a Dark Chao from Sonic. We will begin with the basic shapes. Add a sphere for the head, scale it down slightly in the Z dimension, then add a sphere for the body, and use proportional editing in edit mode to make the bottom slightly flatter. We can then add another sphere for the feet, use proportional editing on both tips to make the tips slightly flatter, and we can mirror the feet using the body as a mirror object. For the arm, add a sphere, then use proportional editing to make a teardrop leg shape, then you can duplicate this hand and move it to the other side of the body. To make the head tail, add a curve, subdivide the curve to add more vertices, then select the vertices and use G to move the head tail into shape. You can give it some volume by adding a circle curve, then going into the bevel section in the geometry section of the curve tab and hitting select object for the head tail curve. Then select the circle to serve as the object which we'll be using to give the head tail curve some volume. You can edit the circle in edit mode to affect the volume of the head tail. For the hands, we can join the hands together with J, then we can click on the final vertex of both hands and use Ctrl numpad plus to increase the selection. Use E to extrude and then Alt S to give the hands a defined beginning. To give the tips of the hand a more defined edge, we can then add edge loops using the loop cut in edit mode using Ctrl R. We can then enter sculpt node to put the arms into whatever shape you want. I'm deviating slightly from the character art and giving it a different pose. For the wings in the back, we can add a cube, add some loop cuts, then move the vertices into a wing-like shape with G. We can then add an edge loop in the Y dimension, delete the vertices you did not move, then you can subdivide surfaces. Next, you can add some loop cuts near the tips of the wings to make them sharper. We can then use proportional editing and rotate to give the wingtips a slightly more interesting shape. Then we can mirror the wings across the body. For the pattern in the body, we can add some geometry using dynamic topology by setting our inflate tool to 0 and increasing the resolution with constant detail. We can then use the mask tool to make the basic shape of the pattern. We can use stabilized strokes to have more control when making the pattern. Invert the mask using Ctrl I, then push the mask in with the inflate mesh filter tool. If you have any suggestions for what I should make next, please let me know in the comment section. We can now move on to the eyes and the mouth. For the mouth, we can follow the same method we used for the pattern on the body by using the mask tool to get the basic shape of the mouth, invert the mask, and use the inflate mesh filter tool to push the mouth in. We can then make the teeth. I'm going to be making the teeth a little bit more drawn on because I feel like this will go well with the model. This model is going to be 3D printed, so I just wanted to make a mouth that'd be slightly easier to paint after printing that follows the design of the Chao. We can do this by using the mask tool and following the same method, drawing the gaps between the teeth, then inverting the mask and using the inflate mesh filter tool to push the gaps between the teeth inward. We can then move on to the eyes, which follows the same method of drawing the mouth. For the eyelids, we will push them out instead of pushing them in, so we'll be using the opposite direction of the inflate mesh filter tool. The same will be done with the pupil. But for the pupil, you can use the pinch tool to get a sharper boundary. If you are enjoying the video so far, please don't forget to like and subscribe it. It would help this Dark Chao find a wider audience and help more people sculpt fun characters from video games and pop culture. For the tail tip, we can add a cube, selecting the vertices on one side and then using X and then X to scale them in the X dimension inwards. We can then add a center line with Ctrl R, then add two other loop cuts with Ctrl R again, using G then Y to get them in the general shape of the tail tip. We can then move the tail tip over to where the tail is, making everything slightly bigger than you would think you would make it, because this will be 3D printed. And when you're 3D printing, you do not want anything to be too delicate in any location. We can then move on to the head of the tail. Convert the head of the tail to mesh, then fill in the tips of the head of the tail by selecting the ends with Alt left click, then selecting F. We can then define the shape of the head tail in sculpt mode by using the snake hook tool, the smooth tool, and the inflate tool. After the shape is defined, union the head tail to the head. Next is the pom-pom, which can be done by adding a sphere, subdividing surfaces 1 or 2 levels, then going into edit mode and using select, then selecting random vertices. Then we can scale them out with S, making sure you have proportional editing enabled, using the mouth wheel to increase the influence of the proportional editing. We can then smooth the connection between the head tail and the head with the smooth tool and the clay slips tool to add some more volume and make a smoother connection point between the head and the tail. We can then use R and Z to rotate the head into a slightly more mischievous position. Now we can join the feet together with J, then use the chin tool in sculpt mode to make the feet slightly flatter so they can stand on their own if you want to make this model stand on its own without a base. We will now be moving on to the final steps, which is just painting the Chao. And while the painting is occurring, I'll tell you a couple things that I like about the model of this Chao and the things that I learned to appreciate while modeling it. First, I would like to say that I like how mischievous the Chaos are. I think it is kind of hard to make a mischievous looking model without it looking mean-spirited or too silly, and I think the Dark Chao is a good in-between of those two things. I like the Chaos designs in generals, because the Chaos from Sonic all have the same basic body plan, but they all are very unique in some way. And I think the artists do a good job of doing this by changing one or two slight features, but keeping the general body plan, but having a uniquely identifiable but unique silhouette to each individual Chao. The other thing I like is the color palette, where it is not black and blood as you would normally see, but it's black and pink. And I think that really adds to the mischievousness of the character without it making mean-spirited or evil looking. If you like the model and want to find a free 3D printable version, please go to my Printables page in the description and download it for yourself. If you would like to support more videos and more models, please support my Patreon page.